genuinely, I love, and I've said this to people, said, what was David Bowie like? And I only met him very briefly a few times, but I always got a really, really very lovely feeling from him. He seemed like he's just a lovely man. I arrived in New York in a rehearsal studio in what's probably now Meatpacking District. It's very swish, but it wasn't then. Early 2000s, and it was still very down at heel. And there was a rehearsal room there, and I went up 3 floors and waited for him. And he arrived with a baseball cap and a cup of coffee and a pair of trainers, and he'd walked from Soho where he lived. And no glitz, no glamour, no limousine outside, no bodyguard. And that's how he lived in New York, of course. And we sort of found that out retrospectively. But so to me, he didn't seem. I don't think he was putting on a persona. I thought he was just, particularly in that interview when I sat down with him for half an hour, 40 minutes. I just thought he's very honest, and there didn't seem to be a mask there at all. He was fascinating. But it must be amazing for you to have gone through all this archive. I have very few, minutes of tape, but you've dug up stuff. Just to make clear to people here, Dick, what are we going to get? You've got stuff that hasn't been seen, or at least hasn't been seen for a long time.
Yeah, it's not been widely seen. Maybe it's true to say. It's almost impossible to find, even with an archive as vast as the BFI's. It's almost impossible to find stuff that nobody's seen because, like Francis and other filmmakers over the years, have done a very good job of uncovering footage. Yeah. I think the two main things about this is some of this footage you'll see is available online, but in very poor quality, and this is the best possible quality that we could have got out of the archive. Yeah. And there are perhaps some longer versions of things that you may have seen slightly before. Also, the BBC in particular have really done a good job of exploiting their archive. So, on the whole, I've tended to steer clear of BBC material. This is mostly ITV and Channel 4. And that stuff is just exploited less, so it gives you something to see. It's also a mixture of different faces of Bowie, so you've got over different time periods, but you've also got him acting, you've got him in interviews, and the interviews are really revealing. I think he's a very good interviewee, and of course in performance. But the interviews, it's absolutely obvious that he's much more comfortable the older he gets. He seems to become happier. He's more at home. I suppose that's natural, but when you watch them chronologically, it is strange how edgy and difficult he seemed to find it in the beginning.
Yeah. Having said that interview I did with him in 2002, of course, was just after the 9/11 attacks, which he witnessed, and he was really, really deeply shaken by that, and I think it made him think, quite profoundly about mortality, and that came out in that interview, and. It's incredibly moving to hear that. And he was looking forward, that's the wrong phrase to use, but he was imagining what it was like when he did die. And as he said in an interview with me, it just doubles me up with grief to think that I will lose or leave my daughter behind, leave my family behind. He did become more comfortable in his skin. His media persona became stronger, possibly, but I think he was thinking deeper in more profound ways. This is a man with a huge brain, isn't it? As we'll see.
Yeah. He also responds, I think, in the interviews, he responds to people that take him seriously, that ask difficult questions.
Yeah.
He seems to respond better than those that are on a superficial level.
Yeah.
And that he seems to tire of very quickly.
Yeah. I don't think that's true of any artist, though. I think I've had that a lot. I'm lucky enough to do interviews for Radio 4, and it's a place where you're expected to ask serious questions, and there's a lot of pop artists, and I've been warned before by publicists, they don't talk, they're not very good, you'll just get very flippant answers, and that's usually because they have been asked stupid questions, and actually if you ask serious artists serious questions, you'll get better answers, and I think that's Bowie's a prime case in point, he was very serious about what he did, he worked very hard at what he did, and I think if an interviewer took that seriously and you could prove that you listened and were genuinely interested, then he would be interesting in turn.
We know he's a giant in the music firmament, and also because he was there a long time as well. People forget how long he was around, really, since the 60s. He kept making fantastic music. Do you think death hasn't diminished that respect that's held for him, is it?
It rarely does, though. It really does. And I think in his case, because it was such a huge shock, it was such a huge shock. You think about that morning he died. You know, as anybody in this room, I'm sure, will remember. I remember turning on the Today programme at 7 o'clock and hearing that news and just literally just jumping up and just going, no, this can't be right. You know, 2 days earlier on the Friday night, I was on front row talking about the new album. I think 2 days earlier we'd been reviewing it, and there he was. And then I got a phone call from the Today programme, just to try and do an instant kind of response, instant obit, and it was one of the hardest things to do because I couldn't actually believe what I just heard, that he had died. First interview I'd ever done, first actually broadcast on Radio 4 that I've ever done naked as well. So that's another reason to remember that interview.
Thank you for that. So we're going to start the compilation now. It's